Chapter 43. Office. On Monday I went straight to Mrs. Lloyd's office with Mum and Dad. Mr. Howard was there as well, and everyone's faces looked tense, and like they were about to shout at me. I wasn't feeling very hopeful. Mrs. Lloyd started by reading from my school file, which they must keep in the office. It included a record of all the trouble I'd been in over the past year. It went on and on and on. I even saw Mr. Howard flinch a couple of times. Mum let out a huff now and then, and Dad glared at the carpet. "Do you have anything to say, Maxwell?" he said, closing the file. "Do you really hate school that much that you spoil every day that you are here?" I cleared up my throat. I'd been thinking about what I was going to say all over the weekend. I told Charlie how I felt. I told Mum and Dad and Bex how much they mean to me, and now it's the school's turn. I cleared my throat. "I don't hate school," I said. Mrs. Lloyd rolled her eyes, but Mr. Howard leaned forward on his elbows, on his knees, his fingers pressed to his mouth. "In fact, I like school. School is my normal. It's my place to get away from the shouting at home." I felt Mum flinch. There was no way I could look at her or Dad. I cleared my throat again. "I know I haven't been the best pupil, or the best friend, or the best son, but I do care. I care about my friends and my family and even my school. I just sometimes do stuff to ruin it, you know?" Mr. Howard was the only one nodding. I carried on. "School is a place where things are okay, where there aren't two people shouting across my head or trying to ruin each other's lives by sticking stupid sticky notes on their food." Mrs. Lloyd glanced at Mum and Dad, but they didn't say anything. "And sometimes when I come into school I feel like I'm a bottle of fizzy drink. All evening or all weekend I've been trying to keep the lid on that bottle, but the bottle feels like it's been inside a washing machine and it's fit to burst. Do you know what I mean?" I looked at my teachers. I don't think they really did know what it was like to feel like a bottle of fizzy drink, but they both nodded, and I took a deep breath. Then when I get to school, I sit back and whoosh. It's like the lid just blows off, just like that. And all my thoughts and worries and upsets, well, they all come shooting out, and I can't get the lid back on again. I noticed that I was twisting my hands together, and it kind of hurt, so I stuffed them underneath my knees. Mrs. Lloyd's face didn't look quite as angry, and Mr. Howard was pressing his lips together. Dad cleared his throat, but didn't speak. "I'm sorry for everything I've done, Mrs. Lloyd." My voice began to wobble then, so I stopped there. My head teacher sat back in her chair. "I think," she said. Her eyes looked up at the ceiling for a moment. She seemed to be struggling to find the right words. "I think you are a clever, intuitive and understanding young boy, Maxwell. And I think Mr. Howard and I need to have a good chat with your parents about how we can try and help with all this frustration you're feeling. How does that sound?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. Mr. Howard leaned forward. "I think we can work together and learn something from each other here, us as teachers, your parents, and you. Isn't that right, Mr. and Mrs. Beckett?" I looked at Mum and Dad, and they looked awkward, but they nodded. "Does this mean I can stay at this school?" Mrs. Lloyd started fiddling with some papers on her desk. "You'll still be punished for what happened at the ball. We can't let that go. But we won't be taking things further than that. Now you get yourself off to your first lesson and be good. Okay, Maxwell?" I nodded back, trying not to grin too hard as it kind of hurt my cheeks. My punishment for turning the electric off at the ball was to help Mr. Farrow, the caretaker, with his duties during break times for a few weeks. I walked around the playground picking up litter while wearing an orange jacket. The other kids thought it was hilarious and shouted stuff at me, but whenever I felt like shouting back, I thought about being erased and kept quiet. I also had one of those little grabbers, and after a while I quite enjoyed spotting a sweet wrapper and picking it up with a claw and putting it in the bin bag. I found I was concentrating on what I was doing so much, the bell went before I knew it. I was also on report, which meant I had to get my card signed after each class to say I'd behaved myself during lessons or not. And if I got any negative points, I'd be back to Mrs. Lloyd's office. I knew I wouldn't get into trouble again. I was hoping to try to talk to Charlie, but he was at a hospital appointment getting his nose checked again, so that made me feel a whole lot worse. On the way home from school, I prepared myself and Mum and Dad to launch into another argument after the meeting with Mrs. Lloyd. I knew they'd be blaming each other for everything, especially the bit about me feeling like a fizzy bottle. When I got in, everything was quiet. Dad was in the kitchen making dinner, and Mum was sitting at the table on her laptop. They weren't talking, but it didn't feel tense, like they'd just had a big row or anything. It just felt like they'd run out of things to argue about. Monster came over to greet me like he always did, wagging his tail round and round. I gave him a longer cuddle than usual. "Someone posted this earlier," said Dad, handing me an envelope. I stared at the envelope, which had Maxwell written on the front. I recognised the handwriting immediately. I was going to go to my room to open it when Dad suddenly put his arms around me and squeezed me. "We love you, Maxwell. Both love you very, very much indeed." I squeezed him back. Then I went over to Mum and gave her a big hug too. She held my face in between her hands. "We're very proud of you, Maxwell. We might not show it sometimes, but we really are," she said. And she gave me a wet kiss on my cheek, which I quickly wiped off. I kicked my shoes off and ran upstairs with the letter. I dived onto my bed, ripped the envelope open, and began to read. "Dear Maxwell, you're right. You're a terrible friend. You've lied to me, you've laughed at me behind my back, you've made me feel like you're the only friends with me because no one else wants you. Let's face it, who would be stupid enough to be mates with you?" I stopped reading for a moment. I didn't think I could face being told how awful I was anymore. I took a glimpse at the next line, then carried on. "But then there are things about you that I kind of like. When you're not messing around, you can really make me laugh. I like it when I sometimes tell you something I've learnt, which I think you might be interested in, and you look happy because you seem pleased that I've decided to tell you rather than someone else. And also, you make me feel like I know more stuff than anyone else in the world, and that makes me feel kind of good. I've been to the hospital today to get my nose checked. It's fine, by the way. And while I was waiting to be seen, I decided I'm going to give you another chance at being my friend. So I'm writing to ask you, can you try and not mess it up this time? And can you stop calling me Charlie Geek? It really gets on my nerves. From your long-suffering friend, Charlie Kapoor." I smiled to myself as I folded the letter, put it back into the envelope again. Charlie was